The following program is presented by Ride the Wave Media. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for all our videos at Ride the Wave Media Podcast. Enjoy the program.
Good evening, witches and wizards. Thank you for joining me. This is Practically Magick with Courtney Pearl. Today is a very special episode because it is actually not me that is hosting. The episode you're about to hear today is going to be from an episode of Let Yourself Bloom with Jen Banks. I shamelessly asked her if she would have me on her podcast to talk about a very specific subject that is very important to me. And she talks a lot about, on her podcast, finding your identity through motherhood. That for a lot of women, we tend to lose ourselves in being mothers, being of service to our family, and that she is of the belief that people can retain their identity and even blossom or bloom within that identity of motherhood with the things that are important and matter to us and what is our purpose. And I specifically reached out to her because I have an experience with infertility, and I wanted to talk with her specifically about what women who go through infertility feel like and where that connects with our identity and in pursuit of our purpose. So that is what you are going to hear with our conversation from her episode. I just wanted to add in a little bit of my own magic when talking about this subject. So before we get to the episode that I'm going to show you, I would like to start it out in the Practically Magick way and do a card reading and a little storytelling to help introduce us and introduce what it is that Jen and I talked about. So the first thing that I want to do is pull a card, and I've chosen the Goddess Power Oracle deck for this because, to me, when asked about mothers and women power, I specifically think about goddesses, the goddesses of mythology, and who it is that I relate to or honor when it comes to my own deities and my own worship is I think of the goddess. So the Goddess Oracle deck, Goddess Power Oracle deck, we're going to choose a card. And the card that comes up, oh, this is absolutely perfect for what we're going to talk about today because this is the Kali card. I'm showing it on the screen for those who are watching on YouTube. Kali, or the word that is associated here in the deck, is liberation. I want to share an experience that I had in England last year because I think it falls perfectly in line with this card, Kali being the goddess of destruction and creation. And the belief system around the people that worship Kali, or that it's part of their mythology, is that the creative energy of the universe is also the energy that has to be destructive. And that can sound really scary, but it's actually really beautiful. And the way that I think of that is the way that a caterpillar has to completely deconstruct or destroy or take apart cell by cell its own body in order to transform and be reborn into the butterfly. That, to me, is a perfect symbol for what it means when we have to honor the destruction as well as honoring the building and the creating of something. They are the same energy, or they are coming from the same place. And why I feel like this needs to come up. So this experience that I had in England, when I went, we did a ritual ceremony at the Red Spring, in the Chalice Well Gardens. The ritual was specifically to identify the legend of the Well Maidens. The Well Maidens were keeping the Holy Grail safe near the well, and their job was to bring it out at certain times of the year and festivals to honor and to display the Holy Grail and the chalice. And the story goes that these maidens were attacked when the area or the land was invaded, and some of the well maidens ran away, some were killed, some were violated, and it was very, very much a dishonor on the maidens themselves, who were the guardians of the chalice, but also of the chalice well. And the way that the legend goes, we were asked to think of what had been taken from us in our past, something that we felt was a violation or an injustice done to us, and that as we concluded this ritual, we would reclaim that for ourselves and we would step into our own sovereignty through this experience. And I really didn't have any intention in mind when I went into it. When I thought about what I would want to reclaim, there wasn't something that stood out to me as like, oh, this is what I'm here for. This is definitely what this ritual is for me. It wasn't until we did a certain part of the ceremony where one by one individually, we were asked to go in and we were to stand in front of the red spring. So where the spring comes out, there's a little trickle or river or a little creek that they filter the water through, and then it comes down this waterfall and into a pool. And at this point, you go through a gate and there's this little area. I did a painting of this area because it was so sacred and special to me. This little area where there's a pool, and the water, it is so thick with iron that all of the rocks and the pool where the water comes and collects, it's all red. And if you spend any time in the water, if you walk in it, or if you fill up your canteen with it, it will be red. It will be stained red because there's so much iron in the water. And that's why it's the Red Spring. So it's a very sacred pilgrimage. It's a sacred place for a lot of pagans and Christians alike because of the legend of the Holy Grail, believed to have been brought there. And this is in Glastonbury, by the way, if you didn't know. So it's very red. The little waterfall area is red. And we were asked to straddle the water, the little creek as it came down before it goes into the pool. We were asked to put one leg on each side and then just look into the waterfall and identify what it was we were reclaiming. And it wasn't until that moment that I realized that with my infertility, with the identity of wanting to be a mother and not being given the chance to be a mother in the way that I imagined I would be, the way most women in a natural state just get pregnant and have a baby, I didn't realize how very violated I felt at having had that opportunity taken away from me. And even at this point, I had my children. I have 3 sons. I have 3 children, and I'm a parent. I'm a mom. But in that moment, I realized how much that, separate from parenthood, that had been taken from me, that felt like a violation, and that the flow of blood in a typical healthy menstrual cycle was also taken from me. What's interesting about that is when I was a teenager going through like the maturation classes and things that you take, and they talk about, what a woman's body is going to do, I was terrified. I was not somebody who was looking forward to that. I was like, oh no, I can't believe that women have to go through that every month. And yet, when I was no longer able, my body was not able to do that anymore. I didn't realize the grief that I would feel at having that taken away. And that moment was really precious to me, really sacred. And I'm sharing that publicly because I feel it is so important for everyone, whether you're a man, a woman, whether you want to have children or don't want to have children, whether you're a mother or not a mother, whatever it is, I think it's important for us to hear each other's experiences and to normalize that and to make it okay. And to know that whatever it is you are going through, you're not alone in that. So for me, that was very sacred to be able to stand in that moment and say, this was taken from me. This particular path to motherhood was taken from me. It wasn't my choice. And it was a violation and an injustice. And now I get to feel that, express that, and reclaim my role, my own sovereignty in motherhood or in whatever that looks like. So we're going to talk a little bit more about mother wounds and what that means and what that looks like, especially in healing work. But first, I am going to turn the time over, if that's not too triggering for some people who know that phrase from certain cultures and groups. I am going to turn the time over to the episode that I recorded with Jen and listen to what it was like to process that identity of motherhood when also processing the infertility, being a barren woman, if you will.
Hello, welcome to the Let Yourself Bloom podcast. I am so excited to be here with Courtney. Welcome.
Hi.
I have had Courtney before on my A's for Adversity podcast, and I am excited to have her back for the Let Yourself Bloom podcast. Today, we will be talking about all things motherhood, infertility, and the journey there. So I like to ask guests a question, and I have a special deck that I pull it from. We've done this at DBC a couple times, but it's just a table topics question. And so I pulled it this morning knowing that we were going to be doing this interview, and I really was channeling my inner Courtney when you pull your tarot cards. And so I felt the deck and I was trying to guide it to the right one. And it says, why are some people able to overcome adversity? And so I thought that was so important for today because we are talking about infertility and the struggles there. And then just as a nod to my previous podcast, but what are your thoughts? Why do you think some people are able to overcome it? And then other people, it seems like they're kind of succumbed by it.
This is such a great question because it really applies to a lot of the healing work that I do with clients and with, we're doing emotional and energy healing. And partnering it with also the neuroscience around what people's brains are doing when they're developing, when they're young. I think that whether they make sense or not, we come up with ways of handling things that we bump up against, right? So what I explain, and I just was able to do last week, our first class in our full moon course, which we were able to kind of talk about how when you're young, even in the womb, you're already developing these neural pathways that are trying to get a need met. And it's really just about chemical needs, but those chemical needs are reinforced with like these basic human needs we all want. We all want some certainty and control. We feel safe when we feel like we know what's going to happen. We all want love and connection in some way, shape, or form, however we develop that way of getting it. And, you know, it partners with that oxytocin that our chemical brain is getting. So I think that, you know, when asking a question like, why do some people are able to do this and some people are not, some people bump up against something. I'm reminded of a book, and I can't for the life of me remember right now what book it is, but we'll just have to find it later and put it in the show notes. It was a book about someone who was in a like prisoner of war camp for 7 years, I want to say. And all of these other soldiers that were captured were like going crazy. Like they were in really awful conditions and secluded, and like it was not at all pleasant place to be. Some of them were tortured, and for whatever reason, some of them were just like mentally broken. Like they were not even who they were when they came back out of it. It really was a difficult situation. And he thrived in the same environment that they were all traumatized. And that's not to say that there are some people that are like, oh, you're stronger than everyone else. It's to say that like the way he changed his neural pathways to be able to seek his chemical needs, he changed what was within rather than being able to change the circumstances he was in, right? So he was still able to figure out a way to meet a need of love and connection, of certainty and control, of variety, which is like the endorphins, all of those basic human needs that I teach about. Somehow he was still able to convince his brain he was going to get those, or he was still getting them even when he wasn't, by just changing perspective, so that he was able to go through 7 years as a prisoner of war and still be able to come out of it like, I thrived in it. I grew. I was better for it. So
Yeah, that's Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
oh, thank you.
Yes, so true. I love his quote, and we always need this reminder, so I just want to read it. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I just love that, because it's in that little space. And sometimes we don't even notice that space, but as we slow down and identify it, you're right. That's where our power is to change those neural pathways.
I'll leave it to you, Jen. You knew the book. You know it. You got it. Thank you so much.
I do kind of like quotes.
I know.
Okay, well, let's talk about your journey through adversity. So talk to us about your experience with infertility and how you went through that, the outcomes, the personal, the internal, external, all of it. I want to hear about it.
Yeah. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak about it, because it really is something I'm so passionate about, and so many people struggle. When we talk about like our identity as motherhood and what that is like, I hope that what I have to share today will help people who go through something like that. Lots of people do. I mean, it's just part of the human experience. There's a lot of people struggling with wanting to be a mother, and then for whatever reason, physiological reasons or circumstances, they're not able to have that experience. And that was what I was facing. I went through so this is the way I kind of like to explain it. When I was younger and, a teenager, and really not soon after that I was getting married. I was very young. I was 19 when I got married. So during those like early married years, I knew I was too young to even think about having children yet, but I was very much like, that's my whole worldview. That's what drove every decision that I made. That was what I like to think of it as, like, if I was driving in a car, it was my view from every window. My entire windshield was, this is my life if I'm going to be a mother, right? Like that's just the way it's going to be. And it was when I was 26. And honestly, we weren't even really at that point ready to have children. We weren't thinking about like, oh, let's try to start our family. It was just kind of circumstances. And like, obviously I knew something wasn't quite right with my body. So going to the doctor and being like, well, what's going on? And letting me know that I had FSH levels that were way too high, and that, they said, I don't know, you're kind of like in perimenopause, your ovaries are failing. It's what they kind of used to call early menopause, but really it was just, they call it now like ovarian failure. Mm-hmm. And they're like, we don't know why, but it would be very, very difficult for you to be able to conceive. And I mean, it was like taking that whole windshield, that whole view of my future, everything I had gone to school, gone to college to become a teacher, thinking this was a good career for motherhood. This is maybe what I could also raise children and be a teacher, elementary school teacher. I mean, I made all these choices because I was like, this is what I want more than anything. And that was like taking that windshield and just like putting a big old shattering spider web crack in it and being like, now what? And that's really devastating. I mean, that is really, a lot of women know that feeling. A lot of people know that feeling of like, everything I thought was going to happen. Now what do we do? And I didn't really go into looking at like, well, what's going on with my body, or whether I could do other things like IVF. I mean, we were so young and we were just starting out in our careers. It was like, we don't have the money to do that. And even like all of the things that I was doing, it made me wary of doctors. I know a lot of women have that situation as well, because you're like, I'm looking into things, I'm getting tests done, and the bills come back and insurance won't cover this or that. Or I was denied insurance before all this because my menstrual cycle was a little off. And we were trying to get private insurance. So at that point, that's all it took. I hope we're in a situation now where things are different. But at that point in time, it was like the insurance was like, no, we will not cover you. You admitted to having irregular menstrual cycle. We don't know what that could mean. We don't want to cover that. So it's just like, bam, done. And I mean, how can you not feel a little bit broken and a little bit like, I guess there's something really wrong with me. I guess that what I was meant to be, or what I thought I was meant to be, maybe that's not, or there's something just inherently wrong with me or broken about it. There's a lot of shame wrapped around that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you know anything about energy work, shame is the lowest vibrating emotion on the energy scale. So when you carry shame, that's heavy. That is hard on the body, you know, and all of the lovely side effects of that, including like my physical symptoms and stuff. So yeah, it was literally like a deconstruction of everything I thought I was going to be, everything I thought my identity was wrapped around. I had to completely let it go. And I wasn't going to go looking at like IVF or what sort of different options we had at that point in time. It was like, we don't have the money. We don't have the insurance. We don't have the, like, it's just not a possibility for us. So we just had to wait and see what was going to happen. And I went through a very painful healing process of being able to say, okay, what would that new life view, that new windshield I'm looking out at, what would that look like if I don't have any of what I thought I was going to have? What if I do not have children at all, in any way, shape, or form? I do not have children that I raise and that are mine. I just see what that looks like. And as painful as that was, it was absolutely the most wonderful thing that I could do. And I always recommend it to people who are going through a transformation of any kind, because I've met people who are in that same boat, but it's their career they're looking at, or it's their family life. They're going through a divorce. They're going through, I mean, I call them mini deaths. They're little deaths of life. Like, we have to die or some part of us has to die. And this is what was dying for me. I was, looking at motherhood in a different way and how that would look in my life. So I thought, if I thought motherhood was the only way that I was going to get fulfilled, okay, what if that's not the only way to be fulfilled?
And I think that's so healthy to confront that, because like you said, in all different areas, people don't usually consider that. And if they do, then they're probably at a better place to be open to what's coming next, or they could be prepared for what's coming, or even just not take for granted what they do have. Because I know that I do that in my life. I don't confront divorce because I don't really want to face that or even consider it. But I think that would be healthy to just be open to, just for an example.
Yeah, because it is pretty shattering when that whole worldview shatters in a moment. And I think I've had enough of those moments in my life, at least a few, where I was facing that. I was facing this, like, I thought my life would look like this. and I'm facing something that's going to look way different. And it's possible that I'm going to have to go down that path. I'm going to have to live that life instead. So it's like, yeah, it's not so much negative thinking. Like, I know we don't want to get into traps of like, well, I'm always going to think worst case scenario. I'm always going to think of what's going to happen. But it's like, I am not going to hinder my own personal worth on that view. And I think that's where the beauty of it can come from, is what if my worth and purpose and the way I show up in this life looks different than I thought it did? So if my sister has children, at that point, she didn't have any, she's younger than me. I'm like, I will get to be this amazing aunt. I mean, I get to show up as an aunt in whatever way I want. And that is going to be so amazing too. And, you know, I chose a career as a teacher, and I loved being a teacher, and I was pretty good at being a teacher. But I did choose teaching because I thought it would be a great career for kids. Well, what if I didn't have that restriction? What if I could go back to school, get a master's degree or a doctorate in something completely my own choice, something that was not limited to what would kind of fit in the realms of being a mother at the same time? And that was exciting. Like, that's kind of an exciting thought. Because, you know, you do have to kind of make choices based on like responsibilities, right? So I thought, I don't have to be limited to that. I can get a degree in art history and then get another degree in, and like, who cares about student loans, right? Because shoot, we could live in like the tiniest little tiny home, and that's fine too, because we don't have children to think about. And we could do, you know, all of a sudden my life started to look pretty awesome once I started to kind of go down that road. And it was only when I faced that and was able to look at it as actually a really pretty amazing life that I could live, that we were open to the possibility of adoption or the other choices and circumstances that came our way, which ended up being embryo adoption, which was a great option for us because my parts were all working fine as long as my ovaries were involved. So we had to borrow some, you know, some baby making materials from other people and be able to make the children that I do have. I mean, I think it was really amazing going through some of the adoption trainings and workshops we went through, where they counseled us on infertility and said, you need to understand that parenthood does not resolve the pain and the trauma and the, you know, the feelings and emotions that come with infertility. And they're very, very true. That's very, very true, because I have achieved, if you want to call it that, I've achieved motherhood. I made it. I got to do it. I even got to be pregnant and give birth to my twins, which is amazing. I mean, I'm so grateful for that experience, because not a lot of people who have struggled with infertility get to have that. And I'm very grateful. And maybe even that experience of facing infertility has made that even more amazing for me, or it was just something I could experience and be like, I mean, I really relished it. I loved being pregnant. I loved the whole experience of it. I was just like on cloud nine. Nothing could deter me from just soaking in all the love and beautifulness of being pregnant. And it probably was pretty miserable physically, if I actually was able to remember that part. But I think, you know, facing infertility was able to give me that gratitude and appreciation for it.
Even though that's not always the case, I'm so grateful that it worked out that way for you too. But I just want to acknowledge too that it, you know, I feel like some people get to experience motherhood later in life or after a set of circumstances, and then they're like, oh, well, I should be grateful, or I should enjoy every moment. And I know we're going to touch on that in a minute, as you alluded to, but, you know, even though it did make you more grateful, I'm sure, like you said, that there was still all that infertility trauma to work through. So how did that experience look?
Yeah, I think this is really important for anyone who, whether they go the route of adoption, foster care, they end up doing something like IVF or something like what I did, embryo, they call it embryo adoption. I just want to clarify, it's not actually adoption. It's a completely different legal process, but it's, for lack of a better term, embryo adoption. So what we went through, the circumstances we went through, the stories that made our family what it is today. It's whatever circumstances that led us to actually being able to achieve motherhood. We still have to face the reality that motherhood is hard, that there are moments where I'm not super grateful to be a mom. I'm like really frustrated and it's hard. And in the healing work that I do, like emotional healing, I always tell people there are no better reflections of your triggers than children, I think, or partners, sometimes spouses. So for that, it can be an experience of being able to be like, wow, whatever work I needed to do, whatever healing I needed done, it's definitely going to be brought up in raising my kids, because they're going to match me and they are going to poke at whatever buttons and whatever sticky cells I happen to have. They're going to bring it out. So there are moments where that is going to trigger certain things in me that are like, maybe I wasn't meant for this. Maybe the question of whether, it can be a question of God or your spiritual higher power. It's like, did they make me infertile for a reason? And that question comes up a lot for me, like all the time, like every day, probably. That's a hard thing to face. So to be brought with that, again, we talk about like motherhood as an identity. It starts to really poke at you that question of, what if this wasn't meant to be my identity and I, beat the odds, or I somehow tricked the universe into giving me these lives to care for. And I'm just not adequate. I am not good enough. Because sometimes I'm not. I mean, I do feel that probably just as much as any mom. I think you can attest to that's not like me in a vacuum feeling that. That's women who can achieve motherhood quite easily or happen to be very fertile. They probably have those same questions. And it's just it hits it a little differently because I've had to face that physiological and component of like, well, my body actually could not have children. Like I am what the Old Testament would say, I'm a barren woman or whatever they say, and so it's like, how much was this really my purpose? How much of it was maybe my upbringing making me believe that this was my purpose? The social and spiritual views on how women exist and what their purpose is, because that's always a component, no matter where you live and no matter what church you go to. It does seem to be that that's a topic of conversation, right?
Well, and the last thing I wanted to touch on was when you talked about shame being at the bottom of the energy vibration. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I've been fascinated with that recently and just the different emotions along that scale. I have been kind of researching resentment lately, and that's pretty low in the vibration scale. And then fun is a higher vibration. What is the highest emotion on the scale, or some of the highest?
Yeah, and this comes from Power versus Force. Dr. David Hawkins, I believe, did kinesiology, muscle testing, and with large groups of people, like putting emotions and even like points of view on a certain scale. And so he gave it like an energy level. It's not the hertz frequencies, but you can correlate them. But it's like energy level of the body. So he just has like a calibration. So he has like 700 to 1,000 at the top of the scale is enlightenment or total authenticity, like when we're able to be fully in our most authentic selves or behaving completely authentically, that would be at the very top. And he mentions in the book that not many of us ever achieve that. There's only a percentage of the population that could ever really fully like achieve that, even for certain moments or certain, because I think we can achieve it in moments, right? No one can just like sustain that level. And he kind of talks about like ascended masters, or like masters like Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad, and like spiritual leaders of history that have been able to achieve that enlightenment, total authenticity. And then shame being at the very bottom, which I want to just clarify is not like guilt, because guilt can be affected in ways of like, I've done something wrong. I feel guilty because of what I've done or how I've harmed someone, or, how I've interacted in this situation or I've behaved. And shame is lower on the scale because it's, I am wrong. I am a problem. There is something inherently wrong with me. And that's where that, where infertility, that can come at a crossroads, because you feel like, if this was my purpose in life, or if this is how I gain worthiness, is maybe being able to have children and being a mother, then you might carry around a lot of shame in that I can't do that. For whatever reason, or I went through years of like, maybe it could still happen for me if I do acupuncture, and if I do this emotional healing, and if I do, and I went down a lot of avenues and naturopathic doctors and other avenues too. It wasn't until I was actually doing my transfer for my twins, when we were going that route, that they actually did an ultrasound. This was the very first time I had ever done anything in that realm. And they were like, oh, looks like you don't have any eggs in your ovaries. And I was like, oh, well, none of those other things would have mattered anyway then. I was like, I was never going to naturally conceive. Like, that's when it was finalized for me, was like, it wasn't going to work anyway. I mean, I could have done a lot of work on myself, but if I don't have eggs, I don't have eggs. So that's just the way that's going to be. But then there has to be that, that acknowledgement that, yes, it was something I couldn't control. It was my body. And being able to face the like, well, where do we find worthiness then? Where do we find that we have inherent worth, and that it's not correspondent to motherhood, to being able to be a mother, to how I show up as a mother. And it can translate into, it's not my career either. It's not my position in the church. It's not my position in my social group. It's not any of these things, actually. That's some of the work that I do with people now, is being able to say, what is it deep down inside? At what age were you, or what happened where you made some kind of decision where this was how you got your worth? And then when did you decide that maybe you didn't have it? You didn't have worth, right?
Yes, I've worked through that a lot in therapy too, because I used to base my worth on accomplishments, or, being the nice one, or things like that. And so, you've opened our eyes to a lot of things today. So thank you for just bringing this conversation of openness, and, just not being set on outcomes, or set on, like you said, our one thing that's going to prove our worth, or, just being open to growth experiences in general. So how can people work with you if they want to learn more?
You can find me at prism-healing.com. That's PRISM, as in colors and rainbow colors. I have to clarify, because it sounds like I'm saying prison. It's not prison. It's Prism Healing. And you can find my website. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. So if you search Courtney Pearl and Prism Healing, that's when I do the work with people to help them dive deep into those really difficult topics.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, we will link that in the show notes. And I just really want to commend you for doing the healing work that you are in the world. And I know I have personally benefited from it benefited from it.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yes.
And there you have it. My episode with Jen was fantastic. It was excellent to spend some time with her and to talk about these things. And I just want to shout out again a big thank you to Jen for having me on the show, even though it was me reaching out to her saying, please let me be on your show. I just want to thank you for the opportunity and for letting me talk about something that is so very precious to me, my role as a mother and how that came to be, and what that means for people like me who experience this sort of grief and loss at what it feels like to have what you thought you were going to have, or the experience you thought you were going to have, not be what you thought it was going to be. I think for anyone out there who's experiencing that, know that you are not alone, and that there are many ways to navigate life when you have such a deep and profound loss. And then I also want to touch on, before we finish today's episode, I want to touch on the mother wound, because the time that I spent in England and some of the rituals and ceremonies and sacred sites that I went to were along the theme of motherhood and mother wounds. And that for many of my clients, and myself included, we have and can have such deep love and respect for our mothers, our own mothers who raised us, and yet still suffer with whatever a mother wound would look like for us. For many of us, we're battling things like our mother, our own mother, was a person too, and made mistakes even as they were trying their best to love us and to raise us the best way they knew how. When I have clients come for an emotional process session, I will often have to clarify or give permission for them to be angry at their mothers and fathers for whatever may have happened in their raising. And for me, it can be sometimes, just being an oldest daughter, I was my parents' first go at being a parent. And I have wonderful parents. I have parents that loved me very much and who gave me a life that I'm very grateful for, and really, really, truly did their best. And yet, as imperfect people can be imperfect, there was and expectations and criticisms that I had to endure, or I don't know if endure is the right word, but like I had to work on myself so that I could learn to love myself. And that's part of my healing journey. And it is a very common theme for just about anybody who's coming and doing a session with me. If we're going to be going back to early childhood and to early childhood ages and working on suppressed anger or burden or generational healing, there are going to be things about their mothers that they're going to need to address. Sometimes it's anger at their mothers, even when their mothers were just doing their best, just living their best life, and just trying really hard to survive whatever they were going through. But that does not negate or doesn't cover up or excuse whatever the child self wants or needs to express. I'll just give a quick example. For some clients, when they're doing a session with me, they may have suppressed anger at their mother for not paying enough attention to them. So I've had clients where in a session, they'll say something like, I remember my mom being so busy because she just had a new baby, because we just moved, because we were building a house, because we were, whatever, all the reasons. But they're like, oh yeah, I remember just wanting to get her attention, trying to ask her for something or have her play with me. And she said, no, I'm busy. Now, any mother in the history of the planet would listen to that and go, well, yeah, of course. I mean, we're busy. Moms are busy. Okay. We've got a lot going on. We can't just stop everything and play with our kids all the time. And that's perfectly reasonable. Nobody is saying that you have to do that to be a good mother. But what matters is what the child in the session, my client, what their child self felt. That is what needs to be felt and expressed. The wounds are what they felt about it. It's not whether or not mom was right or wrong. It's just, how did the child feel? And if they felt that way, what maybe did they start to believe about themselves? Because there may have been some attached belief systems that came from that, like, I'm not lovable, or I'm not good enough to get my mom's attention, to have her love. So a lot of the healing work that I do is healing mother wounds. And I remember this one moment when we went inside the earth. We were inside one of the burrows where they had burials. The ancient people, pre-Celtic times, they would bury their dead in these burrows, and they had these little rooms. So it would be like dug into a hill, or the hill would be made around it, but it would be in a little opening, and then you would have these little rooms. And one of them we went to was actually in the shape of a woman. I don't know if that was intentional, but we thought it was interesting that the opening, or the hole, is like where a woman would give birth. And when you go into the burrow, there was these little rooms that looked like a head, arms, and legs. So you could go in and you could go into these little rooms. These rooms used to have human remains. They have been excavated, but now people can go in and just be inside and experience that. And one of the times, our leader had asked us to go in there and spend some time in there and just imagine that we were in the womb of Mother Earth and what that would feel like. And I remember doing that and thinking, I had seen little flowers and little offerings on the rocks inside those little tombs. And I thought, oh, people have come and left offerings to the goddess. And I didn't bring anything. And I felt so guilty and so like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I think to bring something, just something to honor Mother Earth and to just give my gratitude and to show up with something? I never think to do that. I'm not a gift-giving person. It's not really my thing, but I felt guilty. And then I felt this very powerful, loving energy that told me deep in my heart, why do you always do that? Why do you always think you didn't do enough? You never think you're enough. And then this loving energy that made me feel like, you came and you sang a song as an offering, which we had done earlier. We had sung and chanted together as a group. And that was enough. You're enough. What you brought is enough. And that's not something I'm used to hearing, not from my mother or from myself or anyone really. So I started crying because it was exactly what I needed to hear. It was healing a mother wound I had. So here it was, just saying, you're enough. You're doing enough. You are enough. You've given enough. What you gave was enough. And that was really powerful. So I would invite you, listeners, my magic wizards and witches who are listening today, I would invite you that as mothers or as someone with a mother, that you do the work of deconstructing what mother means to you. What is it that the needs are that you need met from the mother, whether it's a heavenly mother, whether it would have been your mother who raised you, or the expectations you would have had that did not get fulfilled and that you are now trying to fulfill yourself. And this awareness and this healing work is all about that. It's all about being aware of what it is we need and then working on getting it for ourselves. Not expecting other people to do it for us, but actually finding the ways to get our needs met. And as always, if you need help in that department, I highly recommend seeing a facilitator like myself who can help you with that work. So if you're thinking to yourself, I don't even know where to begin. I know I have mother wounds, but I don't know what they are. And I don't even know where to begin looking at that for myself. I'm going to ask you to please reach out to me. This is why I do what I do. And this is why healers like me do what we do, because we have been working hard at healing and we know what that feels like. And we couldn't do it alone either. So if you need some help in that, please reach out to me, and you can find me on my website, prism-healing.com, prism-healing.com. And you can see there on my main page of my website all of the services that I offer, but I highly recommend the integrative processing technique, which is emotional processing. That is what's really going to probably cut to the core of what is it that you need to work on and what is buried maybe in your past or your subconscious. I would also like to invite you to look for me on Instagram, prism_healing, on TikTok, Prism Healing, and on Facebook, Courtney Pearl's Prism Healing. And if you liked this episode or any of the episodes that I have done on Practically Magick, I would please ask you to follow, subscribe, or share your favorite episode with a friend. It will help us to be able to make more episodes and more content for you. And it will make sure that when there's new episodes out, you will get notified. So please like, follow, and share. And until next time, go make magic, witches and wizards.